That's right.
Okay. And if you had any contact or any communication with Mr. Sabatino about his negotiations with Crown for the existing tower?
Yes, we've discussed it on a number of occasions, both written and oral.
Now, keeping in mind that hearsay is hearsay, Mr. Sabatino is not here, but the MPC does not restrict us to rules of evidence strictly. And so would you share with the supervisors, to the best of your recall, what your conversations with Mr. Sabatino consisted of?
Yeah.
So to be clear, it will be hearsay, so we'll hear some of that, but it's not
Right.
Understood.
all the context.
Yes, sir. And we will offer a written document also, but that won't be issued as evidence, I think. But this is all hearsay, yes. So I've discussed this with him directly, so I'm not sure what hearsay exactly is, but I've discussed it with him directly on a number of occasions. And on every occasion, he has stated the same testimony, that he has not been in contact with Crown with regard to the negotiation of this tower in a time greater than 2 years.
So that would be since at least 2013 is what you're suggesting?
He said 2 years, and the first time he told me that was maybe a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, so it may have been in 2014.
And did you ever ask him to put something like that in writing for you?
Yeah, twice, and he did so on both occasions. I submitted the first one for evidence on June 6th, and he submitted it.
All right, and I'll show you that email. Is that the email that you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we'll mark that as Exhibit 8. Do you want to read it, please, into the record?
Yes. This is to Colin Otis from Ron Sabatino. Colin, you contacted me.
Date.
Yes, June 28th, 2016.
Thank you.
Colin, you contacted me regarding why Crown is moving their tower from my property to a location that is closer to your home and closer to 2 existing subdivisions in Cecil Township. I think at this point I had submitted a few of the plans. I'm as puzzled as you are. Crown has a year-to-year lease on the tower off Hahn Road, which we inherited when we purchased the property from the Richardsons. I have not had any interacting with Crown on this tower for many years. They have not asked me to extend the existing lease on the Hahn Road tower beyond its current year-to-year term, as they have never attempted to contact me in many years. My only guess is that Crown believes that they can save money and are paying less on the proposed new location by moving the tower. Signed, your neighbor, Ron Sabatino.
Okay. Okay, so that was the extent of your communication or your conversation with Mr. Sabatino.
That's not exactly the extent. We've talked, I would say we've talked greater than 5 times on the telephone because we're both trying to figure out, we can't understand why our neighbor would want, why Crown would want to erect a new costly tower without negotiating the existing lease.
Let's go back to a second to the third objection that we have, which deals with whether the tower would create a danger or an interruption to the existing use that you make on your property as a neighbor.
What standard are you referring to for the record?
That's 403.
Those
403 F
standards.
Yes, 403 F4 in the Uniform Development Ordinance, which states that the proposed use will not be hazardous or disturbing to existing neighborhood or neighboring uses. And so Mr. Otis is a neighbor. He's got the adjoining property, and he makes certain uses there, which we believe would be disturbed at a minimum but also it could become hazardous to what he does and what he currently does on the property. And that's because of his involvement with radio. He has a radio station there, and the effect that having a radio station will have on the radio signals from the tower. And I'll ask him to explain all that. And also the impact that that might have on airplanes that rely upon radio frequencies for location and other things. So I'm going to let him talk about that. But I think I want to emphasize that this is not a situation where someone's just a ham radio operator, like a kid goofing around in the house. This is a serious business venture. This is a gentleman who has spent his life dealing with radios and radio frequency, has developed software and a whole business around it, and continues to do research from his home all the time involving a ham radio station, and is a licensed operator. And he will also explain, or I'll explain, that there are federal rules that the FCC has, and that his ability and even Crown's ability to comply with FCC regulations might be jeopardized by placing a cell tower with that radio frequency next to a radio station, which is operating at the frequencies that Mr. Otis operates. So this idea that this is a neighboring use that is being jeopardized, an existing neighbor is a little unusual, but in this situation, we believe it fits exactly. And so we're objecting to the tower, not only because it's less than 1,000 feet from the subdivision, and not only because there's been not sufficient proof of an effort to make a business arrangement with Mr. Sabatino, but also because there is a legitimate use that's being made currently that would be interfered with if a cell tower were to be erected in the location where it's being proposed. So I'll let Colin explain all that. Tell us what you do there and why it's a problem.
Yes, okay.
And try to keep it radio frequency for dummies.
Yes. A few background points that will help as I talk about things. There's a term called intermodulation. And intermodulation, the way that you can think about it is it's when two radio frequencies that are close to each other, either transmitted close to each other or being received close to each other, they mix with each other. And the best way for a layman to think about it is to think of someone speaking Japanese and someone speaking German right next to each other and yelling very loudly. And when that happens, it's difficulty for either party to receive other signals. So if I was trying to speak in either one of those languages to those folks, they would have difficulty hearing me because of the proximity of those other noises. And it also makes it, for a variety of reasons, difficult to actually transmit a correct signal out to someone else. So for instance, if Harlan and I were speaking two different languages, we were doing it loudly, you would have a difficult time understanding what we were saying. And that happens with radio frequencies. It's called intermodulation. And what basically is going to happen is, it's a well-known fact. In fact, there's a case right now going on. It's a similar kind of case in that AT&T is suing XM because of intermodulation error that's causing XM receivers to not be able to receive their signal when they're in the proximity of AT&T towers. It's a really well-known thing that you can read lots of textbooks about how intermodulation works, how to prevent it, all these kinds of things. So the issue here is that since we'd be about, from my antenna, we'd be about 250 feet away, and we are both transmitting at a similar power. So I transmit at a maximum of 1,500 watts, and I go up to that maximum, and I'm allowed to. I'm licensed by the FCC to do that, and I'll walk through why I transmit at such a high power. And they also transmit at a similar magnitude of power. The applicant is licensed through their dealings with Verizon to transmit on a certain number of frequencies. They have a finite number of frequencies that they'll use, and then they're only licensed regionally. So there's some set of frequencies that that tower will use. And I know this because I've been measuring the existing tower. It's right near my house, so I've been making measurements on their tower. And so what's going to happen when you move the towers so close to each other is that it's going to cause a mixing of those frequencies. And it's going to cause neither one of our equipment to work properly. A bunch of things are going to happen. So the first one is that both of us are going to have a lot of difficulty receiving signals. And normally the way that intermodulation is prevented is, so something like the tower, in this tower, they are transmitting simultaneously on a number of frequencies. And they know which frequencies those are. And so they can do some a priori analysis to try to figure out where the intermodulation will happen. And then they can filter out those noises. The difficulty here is that I'm licensed on an incredibly wide band, and I use that entire band of frequencies to do the research that I do. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And so there won't be really any way for them to filter out the entire spectrum. To do that, it would make their tower not work. And the same for me. I'm going to have to do some, I don't really know if it's even possible when they're transmitting that close to each other to be able to, for me to receive signals appropriately when I have these signals that are coming from right from the tower next door. So, like Harlan mentioned, I'm continually doing research, and I've done this before. Power Analytics wasn't my only company. I've started a number of different companies, and I'm continually doing this kind of work and research. And the radio station in my home is being used for radio navigation, and there's another piece there that's important. So radio navigation is it's the idea of using radio signals like a lighthouse to be able to navigate by air or by water or by land. And so I'm working on radio navigation systems, and the way that happens is you actually transmit 360 degrees in a rotating field. You keep spinning your thing around at really high power, and then you put receivers off in the distance to receive those signals, and you can then try to locate those receivers with respect to your radio station. So to do that, that's why I use maximum wattage, 1500 watts, which is what I'm licensed to use. And that's a wattage that will be disruptive. That will be disruptive to the tower if it goes there. And since they're coming back at me about the same wattage, I can't go above 1500 watts. There's no way for me to overpower the power that they'll be using. So I'll be disrupted. And what Harlan was mentioning is the FCC, there's a number of relevant parts of Title 47. And I'm sure Crown's Counsel is familiar with Title 47, but basically Title 47 is the carve-out for the FCC. It has Title 47 of CFR of the Code of Federal Regulations. It has all of the rules and regulations for me as a licensed operator and for Crown as a licensed operator through Verizon. And there's two terms that are important there. One is harmful interference, and harmful interference is defined as anything that degrades the quality of signal of anybody operating within the FCC regulations. And then there's another term called willful interference, and it's dealt with particularly strongly by the law and also the penalties of the law. And willful interference is when you cause harmful interference knowingly. And since we're giving notice at this hearing, both to the Township and to Crown, that this will be causing harmful interference to my radio station, my existing licensed, FCC licensed radio station, this will be considered willful interference by the FCC, and they'll deal with it as such. The penalties are much different for willful interference as opposed to spurious emissions, which are accidental interference. I think that was everything we wanted to cover.
Well done.